In the last video, we imported the sprites to start making our game. So in this one, let's start adding them into our sandbox scene here. And let's get started by creating a background. Now for this, I'm going to use a background that's in the package we imported from Kenny Platformer Pack. So this one here. But you can use any background image that you want. So if I open this pack, I'm going to go to PNG. And then we have different categories here. We have one called backgrounds. And these are all the backgrounds included with the pack. So if we click on each one, you can see we'll get a little preview in the inspector here. So we have a few different ones here we can pick from. So to get started, I'm just going to use this colored grass one here. Now we can just drag and drop this right into our hierarchy here. Or you can see if we drag it right into the scene, we can place it here and drag it around where we want to let go and place it. And if we let go in the hierarchy, it's just going to automatically be placed here. So it's already at 0 position. So just make sure yours is as well. And just to show, if I delete that, and now if I drag it right into the scene, the position is going to be different because it's going to be whatever I let go at. So if you did that, just change it to zeros. And all that's going to do is put the background at the center of our screen. Now remember from some of the shortcuts, if I want to scroll or pan my screen up here, I can either click the hand and then click and drag it up and down, or I can just, if I'm on one of the other tools, I can hold the Alt key and then left click and move it around. Okay, so we have our background here and it's at 0, 0, 0. Now what a good practice to do here is we want to make all of our little sprites that we put into our game into groupings. So you can see this one here, I just have an object just called colored grass. That doesn't really mean anything. So I'm just going to slowly double click on that. Or you can select it and press F2 on the keyboard to rename it. And I'm just going to call this background. And now another way that you can rename it too is if you select it and you just go over here into the inspector. Up here we can type it as well. So we could just put background. So now we have a background object. What's even a bit better than this, in my opinion, is to kind of categorize everything. Because what if we add some other objects onto our background yet? Like if we want to put some more clouds in the sky or something below here, it's a lot easier to work with them if you have them all grouped together. So let's just right click in the hierarchy. I'm going to select create empty. And I'm just going to call this one background. Or you know what, to be even more specific, let's call it background objects. And just make sure its position's at 0, 0, 0, just so it's centered. This is something you usually want to get in the habit of checking. So it doesn't really matter for an object like this because there's nothing in it here. But once you start putting objects under it, I'm going to drag my background into background objects. And just to show this concept, let's find some other stuff here. So let's go look at our sprites here. So we have our backgrounds. We have some enemies. I'm actually just going to check one of the other packs here. Let's see what we have in here. I'm just going to take this one. So I'm just going to, in this situation, pretend this is a sun. And now we notice something here. I drag this into the hierarchy, so it's in our game, but notice we don't see it here at all. So it almost looks like it didn't do anything, but it did. It's actually behind our background image. So let's try something here. Let's drag this under background objects. Okay, so now I have the spinner spin object under background objects, but I still don't see it here. So with it selected, let's move it out of the way and see. Okay, so we do have it here. It's actually behind our background. So I'm just going to put this back to 0. So now it's at the center again, but it's behind our background. This is because they're both on the same depth. They're both basically sitting on each other. So if I move it up here, it's going to see what happens here. So we still don't see it at all. no matter where I place it in the hierarchy. So let's put it back under background objects. And now in here, we have something that's called sorting layer. We're actually going to talk about those in a video coming up, so I'm not going to cover that just yet. But then we have this order and layer setting. Now what this means is in each layer, which right now we're just in the default, we can set a priority of what's going to show on top of each other. So if I change this to be 1, notice now we see the object. So if we put it up here, if I just hit R and I scale it up a bit, so it's kind of like a sun. Now we can actually see it. And if we go back to background, now if we change this to say 2, this is going to add a higher layer order for our backgrounds. So the way I would think of this is, think of it kind of like some cutout pieces of paper. So if you have a piece of paper, but it's only the size of your sprite, and if you set them all down on your desk, if the one on top is bigger than the one below, you're not going to see that. And that's exactly what's happening here with our spinner. So we don't see it right now because our background is set to 2, which if you're going with the idea of pieces of paper on your desk, think of it, number 2 would be the second paper above. So anything below it, if it's smaller than this piece of paper, you're not going to see it because this paper hides it. So we can set this back to 0. And you can also use negative here. So if we want to make sure something's always at the back, we could put our background as something like -1. That way any number 0 or positive is always going to be above the background. And now just to show it even a bit further, if I take, say, this ladybug and I drag that to our background here, add it under background, and let's move it above. Notice now it's between, if we can see it over the background because it's on layer 0 number for order and layer. But if we move it behind here, it hides because it's 0, but the spinner is at 1. So 1 is going to be higher than 0, which means it's in front or on top of it. So in this case, we could change the bug to be 2, and now it's always going to be on top. But right now we have a little background, we have our sun. And now the nice thing with how we ordered this, how we have background objects, if we select this background objects and say if I want to move everything, now if I click and drag, everything under it moves with it. So the sun is going to move with it. Now if we did it separately and say we had the background down here and the spinner separate, if I select background and I start moving it, we're going to have to move every single object one by one, which we definitely don't want to do. So this is why grouping things is pretty important. So let's put these back under our background. Okay, so now I have this here. So what I would recommend, if you haven't followed along doing this and you were just watching, that's fine. But now I'd recommend go find an image that you want to use for the background for your level and just drag it in and create a background parent object like this and put your image under it. You don't have to do this sun or anything I did. I'm going to delete that shortly. I just want that as a reference. But if you want to add more things in your background, add some little clouds, whatever objects, play around and practice. That's how you're really going to learn and get used to doing these concepts. Okay, so get that going, and I will see you in the next video.